Hi, this is Lira, and this is an Albanian story for a queer perspective. Now, a lot of you have been talking about Albania and Albanians, and there's a lot of news and a lot of talk about Albania and Albanians, but does any of you actually know anything about Albania? Like who we are, where do we come from? Who are these people that are trending right now? And unfortunately, we're not always trending for good reasons, because most of the time, the Albanophobia that is inflicted upon us is the one thing that people talk the most about. Well, today I'm here to teach you a little bit about Albania. I'm here to teach you a little bit about my own story and how I got here. I am an immigrant. I left Albania in 1999 under some really traumatic conditions. I've been living in England for 25 years, and as you can tell from my accent, I've integrated pretty well. I've integrated the way I was supposed to, the way I was told to. Now, I don't particularly like the word integration, because a lot of the time integration is weaponized and is used in order for us to forget who we were. I remember growing up as a child. I grew up in a very simple family in the outskirts of Tirana, which is the capital of Albania. Now, as growing up as a child, I was taught history about my people and where we come from. And I learned that my people were as old as civilization itself. Because what most people don't know is that Albanians are indigenous people to their land. So in the region of Balkans, which you know today as Greece, Montenegro, Macedonia, Albania, and Kosovo, used to once upon a time be called Illyria. And the Illyrian people were indigenous people to our land. We were colonized from the 1st century by the ancient Greeks. Then we were colonized by the Romans. Then we were colonized by the Turks for 500 years. Then we were colonized by the Italians, the Germans, twice. And later on, colonized by Slavic countries. These people that today you see as, or today you refer to as criminals, were actually a people that were so close they didn't know what crime was, or we knew what crime was, but it was very small rates. We didn't know what drugs were. We didn't know what gang wars were. We grew up in a country that you weren't allowed to say any bad things. So let's take communism, for example. As a child, I don't remember much. I remember being a child, but as communism was overturning, what Albania went through was a very traumatic 10 years of what I see as the Albanian purge. During the communism times, freedom of speech was oppressed. The country was gated off from the rest of the world. I remember trying Coca-Cola for the first time at some point in the 90s. It was such a strange thing to me. We'd never heard of it before. See, we'd never had cars. We never owned our homes. These were all social housing, because in a communist country, everybody is of one class. But what, as a child, I didn't know what was happening behind doors is that whoever tried to challenge the system, whoever said even a bad word about the system, would suddenly disappear overnight. So these people would get killed in mass graves. They would go to these prisons in deep rural areas where they'd be made to work for free for the rest of their lives. People would be locked up in prisons for years and years on end for silly reasons, for complaining about the government, or for saying the line is too long, or for saying, the wages are not big enough. You were seen as a conspirator of the party, a traitor of the country. And if you ever dared to leave the country, then your whole family, your whole bloodline would be permanently marked, and no one would ever employ or marry into this family anymore. The segregation from the rest of the world kept us all very, very ignorant as to what was happening. But at the same time, there was rising tensions, because communism, from my experience, does not work. It doesn't work because to live in a communist state, it means to get rid of greed, to be happy with being the same as everybody else. And the world that we live in, it's not like that at all. We are constantly brainwashed to consume as much as we possibly can for no apparent reason whatsoever. A consumption that is costing other countries great suffrage. See, the way that I see colonization is it never stopped. Colonization just changed. It changed its name. Now colonizers don't come with armies and violence. They just come as foreign investors. And they buy your land little by little, leaving you nothing for yourself. And we keep on selling our land because we are poor people. We're a poor country. We need foreign investors, right? The Albanian history has been quite tragic, really, when you think of native indigenous people whose land has been taken away from them violently so many times. And yet here we are, we're standing here, a peoples that refuse to give up, a peoples that refuse to be erased. But somehow, we have also lost our identity. We have also forgotten our identity. Because to go through so many wars, century in, century out, we have been constantly trying to survive. It has been, and it feels like, it has been a constant battle for survival. And this is now embedded into our DNA because all we know how to do is survive. This trauma that was inflicted upon us, generation in, generation out, this is now embedded in our DNA. And we are passing this on to our children. Because the things that most of us saw during the transition from a communist country to a democratic country in Albania also witnessed a mayhem of tragic events. I remember somewhere in 97, sometime in 97, I remember waking up one day and I couldn't leave my house because all I could hear was gunshots everywhere, firing off from every direction. I remember being terrified. I remember we spent a lot of time underneath the kitchen table because we're trying to avoid blind bullets at this point. I remember looking out the window at one point and seeing these two children. They must have been about 8 or 9. They weren't older than that. And I see both of them carrying an AK-47 each. And they're dragging these guns that are bigger than their little bodies. And I remember thinking, wait, where are they going? Why are the two children outside with guns? And where are their parents? And so many questions. I was too scared to even dare go outside. I remember there was a lot of human trafficking at the time. There were gang wars. There was no police. There was no state. For the first 3 days of the Albanian purge, is what I call it, we stayed indoors. It's It's a weird feeling knowing you have no control. And when you're in the middle of all this madness and all this chaos, you don't really know that you're in the madness and in the chaos. You're just trying to survive day in and day out. I remember being told to come back from school running because you never know who could just kidnap you and sell you off as human meat in the Western market. In the Western market. See, these things to us were foreign, they were alien. We never knew any of these things. It wasn't until the borders opened that we went abroad and we started to see what organized crime was like. We weren't born criminals, none of us was. Poverty gave some of us very limited choices. Extreme circumstances left some of us with only one choice. A lot of the time, the wrong choices were made, of course. How do you know you're making the right choice in the chaos? It was 10 years of chaos. 10 years of lawlessness. Imagine the movie Purge. You've seen the movie Purge, right? Now imagine living in it. Year in, year out. We buried a lot of people at the time. If it wasn't for gang wars, the government would take people out. Yeah, the government would take people out. Because in a lawless land, if you were a boy, all of a sudden you had this huge pressure to protect your family. And if you were a girl, you were constantly under the fear that you might end up someone's human slave. We buried so many people. There was death everywhere. So much, we became disconnected from it. How can a queer person, in the middle of this chaos, with no vocabulary, no elders, no role models, in a country where being gay is nothing, it's never spoken about, in a country where being gay was a criminal offense up until 2000 and something, I don't even know, because I left the country in 99. And up until this point, my 18-year-old self had never ever experienced a queer person. I never knew such a world existed. My whole life I felt different, I felt weird. But where do you find the time to question yourself when you're so busy trying to survive? And I've had people talk to me about compulsive heteronormativity, saying that this doesn't exist. And it's a very triggering thing to say to someone, because most people in the Western world are born in Western white privilege or in proximity of it, even if you are a person of color. So of course people will come out and say that it's not a real thing, because to you, being gay is just as natural as daylight. To you, being surrounded by gay people all the time is the most natural thing in the world. Well, to me, it was alien. To people like us, this was an alien concept. We did not know this. So how are we supposed to know? If the information is not there, if you're not allowed to look outside. Because the chances are that if you did, you might go to prison. So there is no way of finding out. So you grow up in this world that constantly doesn't make sense to you. No wonder I was suicidal at 5. Because a 5-year-old child should never ever entertain the idea of taking their own life. That is not okay. And that is not normal. I'm not the only person. This is just my story. Many of my siblings have gone through this and much worse things. But not knowing, I think, for me, was the thing that hurt me the most. The poetry that I wrote during my time in the closet, whenever I read it out, people would say, "This sounds like prison poetry, Ed." And I never really understood what that meant. But I did think about it, and I thought, why does it sound like prison poetry? And it wasn't until a lot later on, when I was in the presence of another queer person, when I started reading up about queer identities, it wasn't until a lot later in life that I realized that queer people exist. It wasn't until later in life that I realized that not only had I always been queer, and this feeling of inadequacy, this is what that was. Not being able to see myself as a heteronormative person. It never spoke to me. It was never for me. It never made sense to me. The struggle for survival had been so long that I had forgotten to question myself. And it wasn't until I started questioning myself that I started finding answers. And when I found answers, I started looking for people like me. Because one thing that immigration has taught me is that no matter how far you travel, no matter how much you try to outrun pain, it will always catch up with you. And especially if the source of this pain is your own country, because that is the case for me. My childhood years were beautiful, I'm not going to lie. I had a very privileged childhood. I was a child who went outside and played with other kids. Nothing ever went missing. I was surrounded by love by my parents and family. But my teenage years are something I'm still to this day trying to recover from. Because what we went through as a country, as a people, as a nation, was not normal. Because it is not normal to watch your brothers and sisters be killed, raped, and ethnically cleansed from their country. It is not okay to see your Kosovar brothers and sisters go through a genocide. And as a child, as a teenager, all you can do is watch the TV and sit and pray that the war would stop, and pray that the killing would stop, and pray that the deaths would stop. And it's not normal for a teenager to experience that kind of extreme fear for that amount of prolonged time. We are a traumatized people, and not just by the last war. We are traumatized people by many, many wars over the centuries. We are tired of fighting. I hate the fact that most Albanians live outside of Albania. It pains me. It really hurts my heart to know that still to this day, young Albanian people need to leave the country in order to survive. Because even though that risk of losing your life on a mass scale is not there anymore, for a lot of us who are in the queer community, that fear is very, very present and very strong. I found out later in life that I was gay. And the moment that I found out, I felt like most of my life had been stolen from me. I felt like I had been living someone else's life. And I was so angry and upset. And I wanted to hold someone accountable. Like, who do I blame for stealing 30-something years of my life? For telling me a lie this whole time? It was obviously my process, my grieving process. I had to grieve the years that I lost to heteronormativity, trying to pretend somebody that I was never. And yeah, I will grieve that. I will continue grieving that because those are my most beautiful years. I don't know what it's like to be a teenage gay person. I don't know what teenage gay love is. I would have liked to know. I don't know what it's like to be in your 20s and be young and silly and be gay with that too. I don't know what that's like. For a lot of us, we didn't know what that was like because our youth was stolen from us. Our reality was stolen from us. We were all sold a lie. And we were imposed this lie and we were forced to live in it. And when we finally got the guts to say no, the whole world decided to turn against us, our own people. And I hear the word so much. You're not Albanian because you're gay. You can't be Albanian because you're gay. Well, let me tell you something, my dear brother and sister from any Albanian land. For your information, us as indigenous people of this land have always been openly queer and openly polyamorous. Now, if you go back in history and look at what type of people the Illyrians were, you'll see that we were pagans. Actually, we weren't even pagans because we worshipped nothing. We did not worship anything. We had no religion. We had no God. We were just Illyr, free people. That's what the word means, free. Free to be who you want to be, to do what you want to do. Now, they had to change this time. Of course they did. Because this is what colonizers do. In order to erase a people, you target their language, you target their history, and then you target their culture. You kill these three, you've killed the people. You've erased an ethnicity. And by God, has our history been washed over and over again by different colonizers, to the point that my brothers and sisters don't even know who they are anymore. They had forgotten. They have literally forgotten that we were free people who ruled our land. We had no kings, we just had heads of tribes. We didn't know what being heteronormative was until the 15th century, when heteronormativity was imposed on us by different colonizers. For 500 years, 500 years under the Ottoman Empire. You cannot tell me that our history was not changed in those 5 centuries. It's 5 whole centuries. Not 5 decades, not 5 years, it's 500 year upon year upon year of invasion. Of killing the people, of ethnically cleansing. Of course I'm going to get emotional. These are my ancestors. My ancestors were called free people. My ancestors' name was changed because in order to kill a country, you also have to kill its territory. You have to divide the people, because when you divide the people, it's easier to conquer. Divide and conquer, right? And it worked. It worked. We were divided and they did conquer. At one point there were plans for Israel as a state to be created on Albanian land. See, the original plans were for Albania to be eradicated from the map before the decision was taken for Israel to be built on Palestinian land. See, these politics, these wars, they have been playing with people like toys. They have created division between us. Because for supremacy to exist, it must have a hierarchy, it must have a pyramid of some sort where people can look down on the next person in order to not feel so bad about the person that's stepping on their neck. Because if you have someone to step on, and so long as you have someone to look down on, you won't feel that bad about yourself. And this hierarchy that starts with the white man on top, the white woman right underneath, then the rest of the people in order of shades of skin color. This is what's keeping us oppressed. Without racism, without discrimination, without xenophobia, ableism, without sexism, without all of the isms, supremacy would not work. Supremacy needs racism to thrive. Colonialism needs racism to thrive. They need to keep us divided, because if we dared unite, it would be a wrap for any type of supremacy. And this will happen one day, I'm certain of it. It's just a matter of time. But that's a question for another show. On this one, I want people to understand. I want people to have a grasp of where we came from. We're not a trend. We're not a passing fancy. We're not seasonal. You don't get to pick and choose when to like us and when to not. We take that power away from you. You don't get to choose that. Because guess what we've done? Despite all the obstacles, despite all the tries, despite everything that's ever happened in history, we are still standing. Despite all the whitewashing, we are still fighting. And one day, I do dream of a united Albania. Of course I do. One day, I know my people will unite. See, it might sound silly to you right now because people think, oh no, that's a far-fetched dream. That's never going to happen. Yeah, but so was liberating Kosovo. So was liberating Kosovo. That was also a far-fetched dream. Because I remember as a child dreaming of a free Kosovo and never ever believing that it might be true. I never thought in my lifetime I would be able to see that, and here we are. Here I am, sitting on a free Pristina, recording this show, telling you about who we are.